In the golden age of Hollywood, audiences saw charm, elegance, and perfection. But behind the camera, some stars carried dark, hidden pasts forged in the fires of war. These men weren't just actors playing heroes. They were heroes, real soldiers who faced death before fame found them. From secret missions in enemy territory to brutal air battles above Europe and the Pacific, their courage was written long before the scripts they read. Today, we uncover the true stories of 5 legendary icons, the trained killers who conquered not just the screen, but the battlefield itself. 1. Jimmy Stewart, the gentleman who went to war. Before he became one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, Jimmy Stewart was a quiet man from Pennsylvania with a heart full of courage. Known for his gentle voice and warm smile, few could imagine that behind those kind eyes lived a man who had stared directly into the chaos of war. When World War II erupted, Stewart was already a rising star. The world loved him in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and the Philadelphia Story. Yet, when his country called, he didn't hesitate. He left behind fame, fortune, and the bright lights of Hollywood to join the U.S. Army Air Corps. He refused easy assignments meant for celebrities. He wanted the front line, the real fight. Trained as a bomber pilot, Stewart flew the massive B-24 Liberators through flak-filled skies over Nazi territory. The missions were brutal. Planes exploded midair, friends vanished in smoke, and survival was never guaranteed. But Stewart kept flying, again and again, commanding his men with steady calm and quiet courage. They didn't see him as a movie star. They saw him as the captain, the man who never left his post. Each mission changed him. The horrors of war carved lines into his face and weight into his soul. After the war, Stewart rarely spoke of what he saw, but it lived in his eyes. When he returned to Hollywood, his performances carried a haunting depth that audiences could feel but never explain. In It's a Wonderful Life, when he breaks down in despair, that pain wasn't acting. It was memory. By the end of his service, Stewart had flown 20 combat missions, earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, and rose to the rank of Brigadier General, one of the highest ever achieved by an actor. Behind the soft-spoken voice of America's gentleman was a man who faced death for freedom, and lived to tell his story through art, not words. Jimmy Stewart wasn't just a Hollywood legend. He was a hero who truly earned his wings. 2. David Niven, the Gentleman Commando. To the world, David Niven was the symbol of British grace, witty, elegant, and effortlessly charming. But few people knew that behind his polished smile hid the spirit of a fearless soldier. Before he became a Hollywood legend, Niven was a man shaped by war, loss, and honor. When World War II began, Niven was already a successful actor in America, starring alongside Hollywood's finest. Yet, the call of duty echoed louder than applause. Without hesitation, he returned to England and rejoined the British Army, leaving behind fame and fortune. When reporters asked why he'd abandoned Hollywood, Niven simply said, "Doing nothing while others fight just isn't in my nature." He didn't seek comfort. Instead, he joined the Commandos, Britain's elite special forces trained for deadly, covert missions behind enemy lines. Their work was brutal: sabotage, raids, and intelligence operations where one mistake meant certain death. Niven led men in the chaos of night battles and air assaults, his courage quiet but absolute. Though many details of his missions remain secret, it's known that he worked closely with the Phantom Signals Unit, a reconnaissance group that operated deep in enemy territory. They tracked German movements, relayed intelligence, and fought when necessary, a life far removed from red carpets and movie sets. Despite the horrors of war, Niven kept his humor alive. He became known among his comrades for cracking jokes even under fire, not out of arrogance, but as a shield against fear. His charisma that once lit up screens now kept men's spirits alive in the darkest hours. When peace finally came, Niven returned to Hollywood, older, wiser, and forever changed. The twinkle in his eye carried the memory of fallen friends. He won an Academy Award for Separate Tables years later, but he never glorified his heroism. Whenever the subject of war arose, he spoke with quiet respect, saying only that he was one of the lucky. 3. Lee Marvin, the warrior behind the tough guy. Before he became one of Hollywood's toughest leading men, Lee Marvin was a real-life warrior who learned about courage, pain, and survival long before the cameras rolled. His deep voice and battle-hardened stare weren't crafted in acting school, they were born on the bloody beaches of the Pacific. Marvin grew up in a strict household in New York, restless and rebellious from the start. When World War II erupted, he didn't wait to be called. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, seeking action and purpose. He got both, and more than he ever imagined. Assigned to the 4th Marine Division, Marvin fought in some of the fiercest battles of the Pacific Theater, including the terrifying invasion of Saipan. The heat, the screams, the explosions, it was chaos beyond comprehension. During one brutal encounter, Marvin's unit was ambushed by Japanese forces. Bullets tore through the air. Marvin was shot in the foot and lower back, collapsing amid his fallen comrades. Out of 247 men, only 45 survived. He was just 19. Marvin spent over a year in hospitals recovering from his wounds. He carried shrapnel in his body and emotional scars that never fully healed. The war changed him forever, turning the reckless young man into someone who had looked death in the eye and lived to remember it. When he finally returned home, acting found him almost by accident. But Hollywood quickly saw something in him, a presence that couldn't be faked. The haunted calm, the quiet authority, the explosive anger, all came from real memories. In films like The Dirty Dozen and Point Blank, audiences weren't watching an actor pretend to be tough. They were watching a Marine who had already survived hell. Despite his success, Marvin remained humble about his service. He spoke little of the war, often saying, "You can't play hero when you've seen the real ones die." Lee Marvin's cinematic power came from truth, the truth of a young. 4. Charles Bronson, the steel soul of Hollywood. Before he became Hollywood's symbol of grit and silence, Charles Bronson lived a life far tougher than any role he ever played. His strength wasn't an act, it was earned through poverty, war, and the constant fight to survive. Born as Charles Buczynski in 1921 to a poor Lithuanian immigrant family in Pennsylvania, Bronson was one of 15 children. His father worked in coal mines, and when he died, young Charles took his place. At just 10 years old, he was already covered in coal dust, breathing darkness, living hunger, and learning what endurance truly meant. When World War II erupted, Bronson saw an escape, not from duty, but from despair. He enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces, joining as an aerial gunner aboard the deadly B-29 Superfortress bombers. His position, the tail gunner, was one of the most dangerous in the sky. Trapped in a glass bubble at the plane's rear, he faced enemy fighters head-on, with only seconds to react before death struck. Each mission tested his nerves and courage. The sky was a battlefield of smoke, shrapnel, and fire. Bronson manned his guns with deadly precision, earning the Purple Heart for wounds sustained in combat. He never spoke much about those missions, but those who knew him said the silence in his eyes came from memories he could never erase. After the war, he studied art and acting through the GI Bill, but the stage could never hide where he came from. Hollywood quickly noticed his unshakable stare, his rough voice, and the quiet menace that made him unforgettable. Films like The Magnificent Seven and Death Wish turned him into a global icon, a man who didn't need words to command respect. Yet behind that hardened exterior was a humble veteran who knew the real meaning of survival. He donated to veterans' causes, rarely gave interviews, and often said, "I'm just a miner who got lucky." But luck alone didn't define him. 5. Christopher Lee, the spy who became a legend. Long before he became the world's most iconic villain, Sir Christopher Lee lived a life that could have been a movie itself, full of espionage, war, and mystery. To millions, he was Dracula, Saruman, and Count Dooku, but behind those roles was a man who had actually faced death in ways Hollywood could never script. Born into nobility in London in 1922, Lee's early life was comfortable but far from simple. When World War II erupted, he volunteered to serve his country, and his journey led him deep into the shadows of Europe's most dangerous missions. He joined the Royal Air Force, But when a medical issue prevented him from flying, his destiny took a darker turn. Lee was recruited into one of the most secretive branches of British intelligence, the Special Operations Executive, SOE, often called Churchill's Secret Army. Their mission was sabotage, espionage, and assassination behind enemy lines. Lee operated across North Africa and Europe, aiding resistance fighters and tracking Nazi war criminals. He never spoke in detail about what he did. When asked in interviews, he'd simply smile and say, "Can you keep a secret? So can I." Those who served with him hinted at acts of immense bravery, missions so classified they remain sealed to this day. His superior officers described him as calm under pressure, deadly efficient, and fiercely loyal. When the war ended, Lee had witnessed more darkness than most could bear. Yet instead of letting it consume him, he transformed it. He entered acting, carrying that intensity into every role. His piercing eyes and controlled power came not from imagination, but from experience. As Dracula, he terrified audiences. As Saruman, he commanded presence, and as Count Dooku, he embodied timeless authority. But in real life, he was deeply humble, fluent in multiple languages, and passionate about history and honor. He was knighted by the Queen, not just for his contributions,